Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining today. Mike from Dynamic Point. I'll give it about 1 more minute or 2 more minutes or so, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Thanks again for everyone for joining. Hope everyone is staying healthy and safe during this time. Okay, I have about top of the hour. We'll go ahead and get started. Again, thank you everyone for joining. If you have any questions for me, just go ahead and chat them in the chat window. Everyone is muted, so you don't have to worry about background noise or anything like that. Today, for the agenda, we are looking at automating AP invoice processing with Office 365. So some of this we're going to look just from an Office 365 perspective and show some of the functionality that is just available out of the box with Microsoft Office 365. And then we'll be also showcasing our invoice automation product as we go through it. But if you're not interested in the product, just to give the disclaimer, there is a lot that could still be achieved without the purchase. So hopefully some good information just from how can you leverage your subscription with Microsoft, as well as you can see what our product brings to the picture. Okay, let's get started. Today's agenda. As advertised, we're going to be looking at the creation of a check request for invoice submission, processing of invoices without a purchase order, processing of invoices related to purchase orders with or without a separate goods receipt, so otherwise known as a two-way or three-way match from the purchasing side, and then integration with Microsoft Power Automate, otherwise known as Flow. So that's going to be our plan today. We could probably get through it all in a little over a half an hour, I would anticipate. So we'll probably end in about 30 minutes or so. Quick introduction to who we are, who is Dynamic Point. So we're a software company. We've been in business since 2009, so about 11 years now. Our focus during that time has always been in extending ERP and CRM systems using SharePoint applications. So the world of SharePoint has most certainly changed with the introduction of Office 365. Our old method of doing things was to build things all on-premise and deploy those to SharePoint servers. And these days, everything is available as an app within Office 365 SharePoint. So as of about 5 years or so ago, we began a whole project to redo all of our applications on that new framework. And then hopefully in doing so and leveraging that new framework, we also built them in a better fashion because we had the opportunity to completely reinvent ourselves as a company, moving off the on-premise SharePoint platform to the Office 365. Now, just a disclaimer, all of the products do work on on-premise SharePoint because the app model is supported across both platforms. Our product lineup, we have a portal application that basically could take a Office 365 extranet or SharePoint extranet and turn that into a customer, vendor, and employee portal by sharing data from your ERP or CRM application. So it basically adds the sharing of data to a Microsoft extranet. We have an expense product for employee expense reimbursement. And today's focus is the middle one, EasyAP365, Invoice and AP Automation. As it states, this was a recent migration as of about probably a year and a half ago to our new framework from the old framework of being on-premise. What makes us different and what is our product approach? And the easiest way for me to explain this is I like to use the analogy that if you think of an app that resides on your mobile phone, our products are very much apps within the Office 365 ecosystem. So if you consider, or maybe you haven't put much thought into it, but an app that resides on your phone, leverages all of this functionality that the phone provides. So take something like Uber. Of course, it has the ability to track where the various drivers are, whether or not they're getting close, things like that. If I am not in front of my house, they can most certainly call me and ask when I'm going to come out, etc. So if you think about how these applications that reside on our mobile phones leverage all of this functionality that's provided by the platform itself, well, we try to do that same thing. So if I were to look here, this is our product right here that is developed as an app, and it's going to provide its own functionality when it comes to invoice automation. It's going to provide a lot of things with the ERP integration to the workflow, such things as vendor templates, PO matching, etc. That gets deployed to a SharePoint app, a SharePoint page that's either hosted by Office 365 or on-premise. And SharePoint here is providing the security, the branding, the document management, and the overall framework for our application. So all this is stuff that we didn't have to develop, that was just provided to us by Microsoft. When it comes to workflow, of course, invoices we typically want to route for approval. We're going to use Flow, now known as Power Automate, for the sake of routing this for approval, triggering people, reminding those who haven't responded to our actions, etc., as well as escalations. All of that is going to be under the premise of Microsoft Flow. If we want other methods to enter invoices, today we talked about the idea of a check request. That's going to be enabled by Power Apps. And if we want to collect even more data, maybe such things as new vendor onboarding or things like that that come up with a AP automation solution, we're going to use Microsoft Forms for that. The one thing that isn't here that also works with our application is Power BI, and that would be used for the sake of reporting. So we'll keep it moving. Okay, this is the highlight of the process that we plan to cover today. So when it comes to invoice automation, I generally like to categorize the steps into three major actions or processes within the overall business process. And the first step is this invoice capture and metadata recognition. So we're going to receive the invoice into the system. In this case, for us, that means receiving this invoice into an invoice library in Office 365. And the great news about that is there are all these methods for receiving documents into a document library. We could use a mobile app, of which I'll show you an upload. We can email invoices directly to that library. We could have a web form, etc. There's all these various methods that Microsoft provides. Scan it, of course, if it comes on paper, for getting documentation to that library. In addition, however it was submitted, we're going to capture information based on the submission method. So an obvious one on the email, who sent it, the sender of the email, maybe the subject. If I do something like a check request, or if I do a form online, we could have additional fields that we want to capture right here in the library. Those are important because those are fields that we could potentially use for workflow, account assignment, etc. And there was no need to use OCR to recognize those, just the nature of the submission mechanism, we were able to capture that data. The second step is a pretty big step. I loosely call it workflow and processing. A lot of things could go on in here. One could be OCR, right? We could submit this invoice to an OCR application, recognize fields, get those data back into that library. So this will continue to be the home for it while OCR is being performed. If there is a need for no OCR, it could work in conjunction with the data that has already been captured on the email. For example, if the email or some other mechanism gives me who sent it, maybe the OCR would capture then things like the amount or the vendor name or the date or things like that. The second part of this step is the workflow. So within the workflow, we are going to route it for approval. We are going to use the rules that have been configured as far as the delegation of authority, who could approve what, based off the what limit within the system, as well as things that we know about the invoice. If maybe a department is recognized, or a manager or something of that nature was recognized, or a project number, we could use any of those attributes for the sake of the workflow. And then the last step is the integration. The integration, we're going to put that into an ERP application and it's going to become an invoice. Depending on the type of invoice it is, it could actually create one of three transactions. It could be, again, a PO match, either being a three-way where there's a separate purchase order, goods receipt, and invoice receipt, a two-way in which there's not a goods receipt, or just a miscellaneous invoice where there's no PO at all for it in the system. So those are the major steps we're gonna walk through here, and we will be showcasing our application primarily in the processing and integration. That's really where Dynamic Point is coming into this. The rest of it is really already being provided by Office 365 framework. So like I said, hopefully, even if you're not interested in our product as part of this demonstration, you'll get some good ideas of how you could use this framework to automate invoices. Keep it going. So our goal, if I do my job in this demonstration, is to highlight the following slide. If you look at all the various aspects that are part of invoice automation, including ERP integration, the sake of having a repository for these received invoices, workflow, OCR, etc., at least 75% of this is being provided for us already using licenses that you already own with Office 365. Our focus here is on that ERP integration and the aspects that back that up or are necessary, such as account assignment, vendor templates, things of that nature. So if I do my job in today's demonstration, hopefully you'll get that, and that, again, all of this is available for you with your Office 365 subscription, with or without our product. So I will get out of PowerPoint and I will switch it over to the application. So here we have a sample dashboard for our invoice automation process that we're attempting to automate here. Note that this is really just a SharePoint site at this point, and with various calls to action. It's what's known as a modern site. That's Microsoft's new page architecture in which all of these aspects are responsive and mobile friendly and can be viewed across virtually any device. So you can see here I have three major sort of calls to action, if you will. The first is the processing queue, the second is my received invoices, and the third is those that have already integrated. Essentially, each one of those corresponds to the steps that I discussed previously. These are where the invoices are coming into the system, the received invoices. This is where we're performing the processing, the account assignment, the workflow. And then the last step is those that have already integrated with the ERP application are basically just waiting payment. If I scroll down a little bit here, I do have an integrated Power BI report showing some details and data of the invoices that are in the system. Here, this one's just highlighting the unapproved invoices by vendor total. So you can see Dynamic Point has most of the data because that's my test case, but various vendors and the invoices that are pending approval within the application, and just the general aging of what's outstanding of invoices that have been submitted but not yet integrated. So the thing to note about this dashboard, this is a demonstration one that I've created. This gets deployed to your Office 365 site. You really get to make this look and feel however you want. If I wanted to put a video here on how to use the application, post something from YouTube, put a document including tools and tips or policies and procedures, I can most certainly do that. And the audience for this dashboard is primarily AEP, but really anyone involved in the review of invoices from a managerial or even a submission method could also use this dashboard to see theirs and where they reside within the approval process in the system. So let's start with that step one, and that is received invoices. So really, all that is a link to is to invoices within a document library using Office 365 that I've created. So you can see here, I have a few that have already been submitted yesterday. If I click on those, I just have a little preview web part to show me a highlight of it and the various data that's been captured. I'm going to go ahead and click the See All just to expand this because I want to bring to attention the various columns that we're capturing here. So as I mentioned, the first step is this receipt of the invoice, which we're going to walk you through various examples of how we could do that. But in addition to receiving the invoices, we're capturing information about them, such things as the sender, if it's an email, the company name, the subject, the invoice number, etc. So we're going to walk through each step and watch these values get assigned, some based on the submission method and some just based on OCR recognizing fields. So I am using OCR here, but we'll highlight what elements are being done by OCR and what other aspects can be just captured from the submission method itself. So for the sake of this, let's go ahead and clear these guys out. I'll delete them both just so we can keep it simple and look at one invoice at a time. I'm going to bring open my email. And we're going to start with probably one of the most straightforward submission methods, aka email. So what I have here is an inbox, apautomation@dynamicpoint.com, which if you guys are familiar with Power Automate, I have a workflow to take this invoice and basically put it in that library. It's really simple, couple-step workflow. So I have this as being a monitored or a managed inbox, if you will, using Flow. And on this email, I've attached a sample receipt, which I can zoom in on here. So as easy as that, one thing to note, obviously this would be an inbox within your environment, right? Our Dynamic Points Office 365 tenant is obviously dynamicpoint.com, and I've created an account here, AP Automation. So you would be doing the same in your environment or using an existing email account. So I have my May consulting invoice, we're gonna go ahead and submit that. So I'm gonna go back to this received library, hit refresh. If everything works well, I should see an invoice appear. Sometimes it takes a second or two. Okay, there it is. So here I have this invoice that just was submitted via email. In addition, you can see I'm capturing various columns based on the subject. The company name was determined by my sender user, right? mmarson@dynamicpoint.com. I have mapped to the company name, as well as an invoice date. In addition, of course, the attachment was captured too. So there's the invoice itself. And I got to be pretty quick here because what you're going to see come in next is the fields that are being recognized by OCR. And in my case, I have OCR set up just to really recognize the number and the amount. So what's working behind this is that same workflow that I used to move it from an invoice to this library. I also have it submitting it to an OCR tool. So there's several OCR tools that have integration with Office 365. In this case, I happen to be using one by the name of Doc Parser. It's really simple, price-effective solution. Oh, there we go. Okay, so again, I hit refresh, and as you noticed here, it picked up a couple fields directly from the invoice itself. So it picked up the number and the amount. Obviously, I could have picked up more, but that's really all I had set up. If I hit refresh one more time, we'll probably see it disappear. The reason that disappeared is after that information was captured, I brought it into our application for processing, and that's when we're going to assign the accounting aspects of it as well as perform the workflow. So that's why that one happened to disappear, but we're going to go back to other submission methods and we'll start seeing different methods that we could receive invoices in this library, and then we'll make our way to the second step and go look at the one that we just created in the processing queue. So other things, other ways, right? And this is just to get you thinking. There's, like I said, probably spend a whole hour just talking about the different ways to get information into a library. Let's try a simple web form. So in this case, I have a web form on our site. This one happens to be public. As you noticed, it didn't require me to log in or anything like that. And I'm going to go ahead and select an invoice and say, please pay method P and hit submit. So what that is going to do is, if I were to go back to this library and hit refresh, notice I also received an email notification. So here's this invoice that came in. If I give it a second or two, you'll notice I'm going to start capturing the details of the invoice. But the details, again, didn't come from the email. They came from the form that just got submitted. So such things as company name in the subject could be easily mapped from the form. So that was a web form. Let's talk about check request. So sometimes the need arises to submit this invoice using a mobile application. Maybe I have people in the field, or invoices are being received by managers, and I want to give them a check request form. So there's really two quote unquote easy ways. One is there's already an app that comes with SharePoint and Office 365. Right here, the OneDrive app, that allows me to upload documentation directly to that library itself. In addition to allowing me to upload it, it gives me the ability to take a picture as well as assign the metadata that I need to capture on that invoice. So let's go ahead and go into our EasyAP, and I happen to be using the received invoices library. Again, I see that document that I just submitted earlier from the web form, but in this case, we want to go ahead and take a new one. You can see there's these different methods. I can take a picture of it, upload it, take a photo, etc. The scan feature is actually sort of nice in that it tries to crop the image and get rid of my background. So you see that little blue, you could go more like that, is trying to recognize that image and figure out what it is that I want to capture. So we'll go good enough, take a picture, and then I'll hit done. So if I scroll down here, if you look at this fields in Mars, from the company name, the subject, etc., all of those are columns that I'm not only seeing in the application, in my mobile app here, but those are the columns that were defined within the library itself. So if I save it, again, going back, we'll go to my received invoices once again, and voila, I have another one that just came in. That was the one that I scanned. So again, you don't need anything in addition to Office 365 to provide a lot of automation for this process. So let's go back to my mobile phone, and we'll say that that upload was sort of neat, but maybe I want to have more of a custom experience where, in addition to just taking a picture and upload it, I want to ask the user a lot of questions. So more of a formal check request, if you will. So if I go to my Power App form here, I have a sample check request. I can see all my previous check requests that I've submitted with this user. I'm going to go ahead and create a new one. And you can see this experience is a little bit different, and then I could really enter just more details. I could do such things as vendor, the date. It's a little bit more of a cleaner, scripted, oops, I'm sorry, I hit cancel. A little bit more of a cleaner scripted process in that I really have control. I could look up vendors directly from my ERP application, terms applicable to this vendor, ask them fields that are ultimately going to be used for workflow or account assignment, things like that, expense categories, etc. So if I was doing something like this, there'd probably be no need for OCR, right? The reason being is I'm already capturing all of the data that I need from the managers who are submitting the invoice. So this is really good for a distributed type environment where the invoices are maybe not going to a centralized AP processing person, but going to the managers in the field. And we're really relying on them to capture the data. And in this case, OCR is probably not even required because I've already asked them all the information that maybe I need for account assignment or workflow. So those are a couple methods, maybe one more, and then we'll keep moving to the processing step, and that's the idea of drag and drop. I know you can't see my other screen, but if I were to bring open an invoice here and just drag and drop it, it's going to go right into that library. So of course, that's going to be submitted to OCR, and same rules apply as you can see from anything else that I submitted in that I'm capturing metadata, maybe submitted to OCR if I want to, if I need to, and then ultimately going to bring it into the application for the next step in the invoice processing, which is that processing step. So let's move forward. We've covered, I think, enough from a submission and the ability to capture metadata. Now we're going to go into this processing queue. So this is the first part that is actually involving our application. Everything else you could have achieved without us, Office 365, probably already have it, probably have all the tools that I showed you today. So this is going to add another bit of element to this process, namely the integration with financial data that resides within the ERP. So this happens to be, I've created a couple invoices here. So this is the one I just submitted, captured the invoice date on it, which you can see is a little bit old, captured the invoice itself. So what happened is when that document was ready to be brought in other words, I've captured all the data from the library itself, you can see it came in on this status of auto created. So basically what our application does is it looks at that library, looks for a given trigger of when everything is collected. So you could think of that initial document library basically being a receipt queue, if you will. And when all the data is captured that I'm ready for, it comes into the application and creates it for me. In addition to creating it, it maps any of the data that was captured in the library itself, such thing as the vendor, the amount, the date. In this case, I have it allocated to a given expense type. So in addition to mapping from the data that was captured, I also have a concept in the application of a vendor template. And that's where really the rest of this data is coming from. So in this case, I'm sort of meshing two sources of information. First being the what was captured on the invoice, either from the submission method or OCR. And in this case, I have a vendor template for dynamic point. So I have my dynamic point vendor here that says all of our invoices by default get allocated to these, what we call categories. So these categories are completely configurable, but mine are set up to represent such things as cost center, expense types, locations, and amounts. And those in my configuration equal this account. So two things coming together here, really the data that was captured and then another aspect of functionality within our application of templates. Now, do I need to do that? Absolutely not, right? Ultimately, I'm going to create an invoice with this. And before I create the invoice, I need to have the financial data. That could be assigned now, right? Someone could go in here and say, hey, this is the wrong cost center. It needs to be assigned to another one. When I do that, you're going to note that the account got updated immediately there. So you can most certainly do it from a dashboard processing, an admin could come in from AP and adjust these things, or you could actually just leave them blank and it would be done as part of the workflow. So maybe I need to submit it to someone that will ultimately be part of the approval of this, and they are going to help me with the assignments. So the one I brought in, you notice the account is already assigned, but as promised, we were going to talk about the ability to do PO matches and things of that nature. So I have a sample one here that I've already created. So the thing to notice here is you look at these various types of items I could add to an invoice. They basically correspond to the type of invoice it is. A new allocation is one that it doesn't have a PO, so I need to assign the accounts because a PO doesn't exist. An invoice match is applicable for a three-way match in which a goods receipt has already been posted. And a receipt match is for a two-way match in which there is no such thing as a goods receipt, probably because the item that I'm purchasing is a good. And I'm sorry, a service, not a good, is what I'm trying to say. Sorry about that. So you can see in here, I could actually query the items. This is a live query of the ERP product of which POs are ready to be received. And I could add these directly to the invoice itself. So it doesn't look that different than my other one, but the line items are now PO items as opposed to being the accounting GL account assignments. The other thing to note, so this can or cannot go through the same workflow, the same process apply to it. Ultimately, it will create a different transaction within the ERP product. So this will create a different type of invoice match as opposed to just a miscellaneous invoice that didn't exist before. So we're going to go ahead and skip out of that guy, go back to the one that we created. I'm going to do one change here and just change my date because I don't think my financial period for 2018 is still open and I don't want it to error on me. going to update it. Obviously, anyone could update this, or I shouldn't say anyone. If you have permissions, you could update this now prior to the next step in this process, which is going to be the workflow. So what I'm going to do to kick off this workflow is hit the submit button. Now the workflow could be kicked off automatically. I didn't want that to happen because I wanted to come in here and show you the details of it before I invoke the submission. But one thing to note is you could kick these off. You could invoke that workflow automatically as opposed to waiting for a user to come in here. The other thing that you could actually do is, you could change things like the account assignments and use another concept within our application of templates to assign accounts as well. So different methods, all really depending on what is best for your business process. So now I have 2 accounts because that was what the template was pre-configured with. I am going to go ahead and submit this guy. And what that's going to do is call Microsoft Flow for a review and approval process. So it's going to kick off a workflow. So you can see I got a success there that the workflow started. And I also received a notification on my mobile phone saying I have a new invoice to review. So again, using all the tools provided by Office 365, I could really review this invoice in a myriad of different fashions. So I could go in here, see that I have a new invoice ready for approval. This is just using the Microsoft Flow application that's available for both Android and iPhones. You see down here, I have the ability to approve or reject it. I also have a link that I could click on, which takes me to the invoice itself. So here's the details of the invoice. I'll actually show this step a little bit later. So let's go back. So I could approve or reject it from there, from the mobile app. If you're using Teams and you like the Teams interface, you could also approve or reject any workflow action in Teams. So if I hit refresh on my Teams app, I should see a new invoice received. So again, I have some details here on the notification of the invoice. I have a link to click to view the details, and then of course I could approve or reject it, or reassign it in this case. And then the last method is an email notification that I got. Again, if I click on this, it's going to take me to the invoice review form. Now, depending on my reviewer's permission, I told you that you could assign various aspects as it's going through the workflow process that determine account assignment. And this is where that's done. If you notice here, I have edit capabilities that I could actually change, such things as the cost center and the expense type, as it's going through the review. That's not a requirement, it's just an option. Of course, I could see the attachment associated to it. An audit log is informing here of each step within the workflow, as well as I'm capturing notes. So this is the first step in the review, so the notes are not that interesting yet because I haven't reviewed it and put in any notes yet. So let's go ahead and go back and we'll approve this. Say this looks good. Submit it. Of course, in the real world, I'd probably have more than one approval step, but in my world, I keep it really simple. I just have one approval step. And if I were to go back to the dashboard, if all works well, I should see this invoice actually disappear from my view. And it really hasn't disappeared, it's just been taken away by a filter. And I'll show you how I could turn that filter off. So you can see that invoice that I submitted is in fact gone. If I clear my filter here, I can see there it is. So this is the one that I submitted. So if I were to expand the details here, Another thing to note, it is read-only in this fashion. The reason it's read-only is submitted means it's been submitted to the ERP application, it's been integrated. So in this case, there is no change in the invoice from this process because it's already been passed over to the ERP and is ready to be paid and posted. Captured some additional details which went to the description of it. The notes that I entered during the review are there, as well as the date stamp and the user. The audit logs have been captured of each step within the workflow. The permissions is interesting. So each invoice that gets submitted in the application, the reviewer and any people that are part of the review process have to have permission for it. So if I went into this dashboard as sort of a different user, I would not see this invoice because it's applicable to me. So we are filtering invoices so different users have different invoices that they're seeing. And then the last tab you see there is the integration details. So this is the ERP that I've integrated with. In this case, it was Dynamics GP. This is the transaction that was created, and this is the state of the transaction. Basically, it means it's processing and it hasn't been paid. As that's been posted and paid in the ERP product, that will update here within this dashboard. So that was actually the last step. One other aspect is when we do integrate it with the ERP product, we pass a link back to this. So you can see all of the details directly within the ERP application by clicking the hyperlink, which would take you back to the approval look and feel form and share any of the details, the notes, the audit, et cetera, could all be referenced easily from just clicking on that link. So that concludes the 3 steps. All right, we receive the invoice. To go back to our presentation really quick, we accomplished the following. We received it, we captured metadata, showed you various methods for receiving it. We processed some workflow as well as account assignment on that. And then the last step is the integration. So that concludes the demo of the process. If you guys are interested in this or learning more, it's as easy as going to our site, of course. And if you go within products and invoice automation, you will find such things as product pricing, demonstrations, recorded videos, etc. If anyone is interested in having a one-on-one demo, all you have to do is click the request demonstration, actually goes directly to my calendar, and then you could go ahead and book a meeting from there. Otherwise, we're just a little over, it took about 5 minutes longer than I said, I apologize. Thank you everyone for joining. If you have any questions, I will be sending a follow-up email with this recording as well as my contact information. So I thank everyone for joining. Stay safe and healthy and have a great week. Bye now.